in and out of the Beltway. From large cities to small towns to the rural heartland. From sea to shining sea. This is Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio. Inside the News.
Welcome back to the program, Inside the News. Glad to have you with us. On our top left, we have Frank Vernuccio. Bottom middle, Ben Brunson. My name is Guy Wehman. I'm on the top right. We welcome all of our radio affiliates all across the country. How are you doing today, Ben?
I'm doing great, Guy. It is a pleasure to be with you once again, enjoying great weather in Central Florida these days.
Absolutely. And Frank Vernuccio, what state are you in this week?
The deceptive state of New York, and why, we'll explain at the end of the show.
Oh, it might be a hot button topic, or who knows what Frank has got up his sleeve. All right, the vaccine rollout, Frank, let's dig into this. It's better than what people thought it was going to be, and had it not been for President Trump back in 2020 getting this thing started, these vaccines wouldn't be happening now, would they, Frank?
Well, there's a slight bit of magic going on from the Biden administration. Joe Biden basically refuses to acknowledge that Donald Trump is responsible, thanks to Operation Warp Speed, for the vaccine. Of course, the fact that President Biden was vaccinated before he even took the oath of office makes it somewhat difficult to claim that his administration is responsible for the vaccine rollout. But we'll see a lot more of that coming up. The fact is, the Operation Warp Speed success has been singular. It has been something that has some historical significance, and yet both the media and the Biden administration continue to allege that Trump played no role.
All right, as they say in the White House press corps room office with Jen Psaki, we'll circle back to you on that. Ben, go.
Well, let's look at the numbers. The numbers are very good, and this administration's attempt to discredit Trump and take the credit for this is, I think even most Democrats see through that. But we're at around 2.5 million doses being administered per day across the country. It's probably headed towards 3 million a day. The supply is increasing. Florida has increased its timeline to allow everyone in the state. DeSantis is now talking about sometime during the month of April, maybe in early April, they will essentially end the age restrictions in the state of Florida. Right now it's 60 and over, about to go to 55 and over in the coming days. Running the numbers, roughly 30 million Americans have had COVID and survived, so they are vaccinated by virtue of having suffered the disease. Another 35 million Americans have been fully dosed, have received both doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And another 30 million or so have received at least one dose. So we are closing in on over 100 million Americans that are effectively vaccinated. And that is a great start. And obviously the vaccine rollout has been targeted towards the most vulnerable people in this country, those over 65 and others suffering from medical comorbidities that would affect them. So this is all great news, and it should be translating into a fully open society. I think most Americans are there well ahead of Washington, D.C., which is dreaming about perpetual lockdown. What we need most of all is to have somebody shut down Anthony Fauci and his ridiculous comments and his dream to keep us shut down forever, and just allow the American people to do what they do best, which is resume productive activity and get this economy humming once again.
All right, there's a lot that Ben has mentioned that's going to be coming up later when he started talking about Governor DeSantis. We're going to talk about him and the other Republican GOP governors being attacked across the country by the Dems because they realize they have to attack them. That's the only way they're going to win, because they are actually winning the fight. That's going to be in segment number 3. And then near back to normal in March Madness, we're going to talk about that in segment number 4. But let's go back to our topics here, Frank. Massive tax hikes. Biden in his boneheaded moves. And it's unbelievable. Things are starting to hum along, and he literally wants to put a monkey wrench in this thing and throw it all off track.
Well, just to remind everyone, of course, before the Trump administration came in, the United States had the highest effective corporate tax rate of any of our developed trading partners. That isn't simply a statistic. It means that jobs were migrating overseas as corporations migrated overseas and did more activity overseas. A corporate tax hike is an anti-jobs bill. That's exactly what it comes out to be. If you like the specter of jobs moving en masse off American shores and going to China or elsewhere, then you like the idea of a corporate tax hike. One economist told me that there is no such thing as a corporate tax. It's simply a pass along to consumers and others.
Mm-hmm.
The most basic concepts of economics, whether it's in job creation, whether it's in inflation, simply seems to evade the Democrat left. 1 and 1 to them never seems to equal 2. I guess it's all that new math that leftist educators have been fostering down the throats of our kids. But the concept of, and you're going to see this more and more, of financial warfare between the haves and the so-called have-nots, that's going to be the rhetoric. But the reality is going to be just the opposite. Every time you boost that corporate tax rate, that's a loss in jobs. That's going to have a spiral effect because more people without jobs means more unemployment that has to be paid out, more welfare that has to be apportioned, and more disaster for the economy as taxes have to go up to pay for all that welfare. What a cycle of despair.
Yeah, boy, isn't that the truth? Okay, Ben, you're our resident economist. Help us through the numbers.
Well, unfortunately, the Democrats are taking the shotgun approach in these discussions over tax hikes. So they're really looking across the board at just about everything, including a lot of ideas that have been floating around the liberal left, the progressive left for a long time, like a wealth tax and a transactions tax on financial transactions, such as trading on Wall Street. A lot of these ideas seem to be on the table and being taken very seriously right now. One of the worst things, though, they're talking about is just what Frank said, which is increasing the marginal rate on corporations back up to 28 to 32% range from the current 21%. We went to 21% because we were forced to by the rest of the world. You cannot have a situation, corporations, big corporations are international businesses. They can be based in any country and operate the way they do. Effectively, Apple was effectively based in Ireland from a tax perspective because of the favorable Irish tax laws. The tax reform that happened under Donald Trump 4 years ago reversed that situation and opened the U.S. to corporate domicile once again. And a lot of corporations brought money back. A lot of corporations talked about changing their future plans to emphasize their basing in the United States. That is very good for this country, and the Democrats can undo that benefit very quickly if they raise marginal rates in this country. Some Democrats are talking about a lot of plans that would be very harmful for the economy over the long run. Capital gains tax increases, marginal rates going up. But here's the perversity of this, and I've said this on the show before. The Democrats, when they talk about reversing the Trump tax cuts, what they really want to do is end the SALT limitation that was imposed, which was a huge effective increase in taxation on a lot of the wealthiest Americans to give a tax cut to the working class. That's what happened during the Trump tax cuts. It affected blue state high wage earners because it limited their ability to deduct state and local taxes. A lot of Democrats want to undo that, which would be a huge tax cut to the wealthy because they think it hurts the blue states like New York and California and Illinois. So it'll be ironic to see, but what is likely to come is effectively a tax increase on the working class to fund a big tax break to the wealthy if these plans go forward.
All right, Frank, what is interesting now is that since the election, it's been the Biden-Harris administration, the Biden-Harris this, Biden-Harris that. All of a sudden now, within about the last week or so, they're starting to mention President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. And it's not Biden-Harris anymore, but they're now mentioning the Vice President Kamala Harris and putting that distinction there. That's almost a demotion for Harris because now she's a step down. She's not an equal with Joe Biden.
Well, what happened was a lot of folks in the press started noticing how strange the State Department's releases were, as we discussed on last show. The State Department in its releases, and the State Department is very precise in its language, always talked about the Trump administration, the Obama administration, the Bush administration, and so forth. Shortly after, almost immediately after the inauguration, however, it consistently talked about the Biden-Harris administration. That started to get picked up by a lot of folks. I think we were one of the first to talk about it on this program. And a lot of eyebrows were raised, considering also the talk about Joe Biden's lack of physical capability or perhaps mental capability to do the job. And that made the State Department's use of language stand out a lot more. By now adding the distinction of Vice President Harris, I think the State Department believes that it is stepping back from that dual administration where there are essentially two co-presidents rather than Joe Biden as president and Kamala Harris as vice president.
You know, Ben, your take on this is going to be absolutely fascinating because Kamala Harris has been able to bask in that. And the progressives are saying, oh, my goodness, the most progressive senator we've ever had, which is Harris, more so than Bernie Sanders. And now she's just demoted to being vice president. And that's not what we bargained for.
Well, I think Frank is right. This is just a sop to the press that has been asking some tough questions. They don't ask many tough questions of this administration, but they honed in on this very unusual language and depiction of the administration. And I think it's a very easy thing just to back off a little bit. But I don't think it changes the tenor of what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now. Kamala Harris has inordinate amount of power, and we have a very weak president from a physical and mental perspective. And a lot of people are looking towards Kamala Harris as effectively the president of the United States. She is having phone calls with foreign leaders, the type of phone calls that typically are held by the president of the United States during his or her early weeks or months in office to reach out to foreign leaders. A number of these calls are being held by Kamala Harris. She had a call with Benjamin Netanyahu just a week or two ago. So these are highly unusual moves, but this is a highly unusual presidency in terms of the lack of fitness for office that you see in Joseph Biden.
Yeah, and it's quite amazing that Vindman is in the room on those calls, right, Ben?
The Vindmans are always around, and Washington D.C. is full of Vindmans, even if he is no longer there.
You know, it's amazing. That one name of that one person almost totally signifies the deep state. And when people hear the Vindmans of what we were just referring to, they all know about that, don't they, Frank?
Well, they certainly do. You know, to some extent, this is an attempt to portray, or the State Department attempted to portray the Biden-Harris administration as kind of a co-presidency, you know, kind of like in ancient Rome where you had two councils, one for domestic affairs and one for war and foreign affairs. And yes, Guy, I did cover the Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus debate in its original format. But I think that is, as the real understanding of Joe Biden's lack of competency for the job becomes more pronounced as he avoids the State of the Union address, as he avoids taking questions from the press, his incapacity becomes more pronounced. And so to some extent, to save face, you've got to push Kamala a bit further into the background.
Hey, Ben, I would dare say he went to the Julius Caesar comment there that he might have been around with Cleopatra as well, Ben.
Well, lucky him if that was the case.
Oh, my goodness. Biden's
Cleo was just great, let me tell you.
All right. Just a final minute here. We've got this race card being played by Biden, and they're not giving up on it. They still think that's a winning ticket. And I think the people of America are getting tired of it, Frank.
Well, they're miscalculating. One thing that is destroying the relations between the Biden-Harris administration and the Black community is the immigration issue. There is no issue that separates Democrats from their supposed loyal supporters in the Black community more than immigration. And Biden is simply doubling down on that.
All right, we've got to take our first time out here, and we've got a lot more on that, and I could see that Ben wanted to weigh in on that. But starvation in North Korea, is that linked to COVID? We're going to find out. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.